And there was 2 points in your book where I realized how ignorant and naive I am. First point was when you were describing in the pandemic how people have gone through loss, but the way they have to process the loss is completely changed. I mean, imagine having to grieve through Zoom when back in the day you can actually gather at a funeral, which is as much about the living as it is about the dead and that connection. And so when I was reading that, for some reason, it really shook me to my core because I started to really think about like, oh my God, this may reflect what's happening in society, right? We see a lot more like pent up anxiety. We see fights in airplanes. We see people storming buildings. And it's like maybe they have had to process loss in such a different way that they don't really know how to process it. So it's coming out in these major reactions. And it's just like thinking about like how draining loss can be. Combine that with the fact that people are drained from their jobs, from their relationships, and now like they're drained from having to talk about vaccines all the time. And it's like, obviously, that's why people are turning to terrible food. They're turning to pills. They're turning to alcohol. And it's like, you can clearly see there's some obvious reasons why society seems to be sicker. And it's just like, can we just understand that so we can actually show some empathy and compassion to some of these folks who like literally had to maybe grieve the loss of a loved one through Zoom in the last 15 months. It's crazy to me. And it really like put a mirror up to me. I'm like, I literally never thought about this.
Right. Yeah. And here's my thought. Grief doesn't need a lot of time. It just needs dedicated time. And so one of the things that I think is important in the grieving process is that space of a ritual. And I think within the pandemic, those rituals that we would create were disrupted. I remember someone, attending a funeral on Zoom and, people were unmuted and it was it's just scattered and it was hard. And I think that, I also think that funerals are not so much for the dead, they're for the living. Yeah. And so, having those spaces of rituals are very important. And that's it. Even though, for a yoga class, that was a ritual for me. That was my ritual in doing it. We have rituals that celebrate life, whether it's a bar mitzvah, whether it's going to a concert. These types of rituals are very sacred things that help us to make the mundane experiences in life to be memorable and to be special, and to recognize that within loss, we need that space because the loss, what is gone was something that was special for us. So when we can create those spaces, those little rituals, and it can be in whatever way you want, it can help us to move forward. When we just take little times of dedicated time, it can really make quite a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the adjustment that needs to be made. We had a couples counselor on a couple weeks ago, Dr. Catherine Ford, and she talked about how a lot of the couples that are doing well in the pandemic have intentionally adjusted to the circumstances, not going to work, spending more time together. And I think that her advice was just a universal for everyone, regardless of what kind of relationship or living situation you may be in. We've been thrust into this incredibly new circumstance, or we at least have been the last 2 years. And no one's really been there to tell us how we should adjust or even that we should adjust. Like you bring up the idea of ritual there and the important rituals to us. Like a lot of kids missed out on the opportunity to go to their graduation. And, maybe they were able to have a graduation over Zoom. And that was what we thought the adjustment needed to be. But really the adjustment was like, maybe someone should have sat down with that kid and, asked him or her how they feel about the fact that they're not going to have a graduation. And I think, to Arjun's point about all this bubbling back up to the surface, I think it's because there's just a lot of people out there that were never given any guidance around how they can adjust to a dramatically different world.
And we're learning how to adjust to this. This is something we're figuring out. And it's like talking about, struggle or grief or loss. I wasn't taught that as a kid. And so I think that we're learning how to adjust in this new normal. and how hard that is. And so I also really recognize we are all struggling. Each of us are struggling in our own unique way. And if we can just, be a little bit more kinder and compassionate to ourselves and to others in this space, I mean, I really think that that's needed.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Just to piggyback off that one point, just so we can actually understand what another person might be going through. It's like, it's more common that you might think that or you want to believe that there are more widows and widowers out there who actually might be jealous when they see other happy married couples. Like, you have to be cognizant of what people might be feeling, right? It's pretty common if, you're a child and you lost a parent, to then be jealous of other children who still have parents. Or it could be common for a parent who lost a child to be jealous of another parent who has like someone who's still living and who's a child who's healthy, right? So there's all these like underlying emotions. To your point, everyone's struggling, everyone's trying to keep it together. Just recognizing that the person you're talking to could be in one of these buckets is really all you need to know as to why you should just be kind to everyone.
And most of those times within those jealousies, a lot of the times it's unspoken too, because people are going to judge that. Perhaps you're judging that you feel that way. So a lot of this is an unspoken jealousy and rage that can come up. And to just recognize again how important it is that needs to come out, because if it doesn't, what happens is it creates bitterness and dis-ease inside. And that's in a way why it's like, well, how about we channel that in an empowering way? What if we started to release that pain and struggle out? That's what I think is needed and important.